You built this empire, Dad. But if you can't stand up anymore, maybe it's time someone else took the wheel. The words hung in the boardroom like smoke, cold, heavy, laced with ambition. Thomas Barrett didn't flinch, but his fingers trembled just slightly beneath the polished oak table. Outside, the Los Angeles skyline burned gold in the late afternoon. Inside it was war cloaked in tailored suits and legacy perfume. The Barrett & Co. quarterly board meeting was supposed to be routine. Instead, it felt like the prelude to a coup. Thomas, 65, sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly parted, jaw tense. His blue eyes scanned the room. Every face, once familiar, now looked carved from marble. His eldest son, Gavin, leaned forward, his Rolex catching the light like a blade. "I'm not saying you're done," Gavin said smoothly. "But maybe you need rest. We all want what's best for you and the company." Thomas's voice came quiet, almost too quiet. "Did you rehearse that?" A murmur of unease flickered through the room. Next to Gavin, Melissa, the second-born, crossed her legs, her red-bottomed heels tapping a silent rhythm. "Daddy, no one's attacking you," she said. Voice syrupy sweet. "But you've been off lately. Slower. You forget numbers, names, and you've been circling the estate like vultures," Thomas said, eyes locked on hers. Melissa's smile vanished. A pin could have dropped and filed a lawsuit. Julian, the third-born, chuckled under his breath. Well, at least he's still got fight left. Thomas stood slowly. His knees ached, but he masked it. "You think this company runs on spreadsheets and speeches? I bled for this. I outworked men half my age for 40 years. And you want it. No, like a birthday gift," Dad Gavin interrupted, rising. "This isn't about ego." But Thomas didn't hear the rest. His breath caught. His hand gripped the table's edge. For a second, the room spun, and then he collapsed. Papers flew. A glass shattered. Melissa screamed. Julian swore and jumped to his feet. "Dad." The boardroom exploded in chaos. Chairs screeched. Aides rushed in. Phones dialed 911. Gavin stood frozen, knuckles white, his eyes wide, with a fear that didn't look entirely pure. Within minutes, Thomas Barrett was being wheeled down the corridor on a stretcher. Oxygen mask on. Unconscious. Pale. But just before the elevator doors closed, his hand twitched, and not one soul noticed. 3 hours later, the Barrett mansion was cloaked in silence. A fire cracked in the marble hearth. Expensive wine sat untouched on the credenza. The family had gathered Melissa and Silk, Gavin, pacing in his tennis whites, Julian on his third glass of bourbon. And then came the sound of keys at the door. Claire, the youngest, the outsider, the daughter no one expected to show. She stepped in quietly, her suitcase scuffed, her sweater modest, her eyes scanning faces with caution. Everyone turned. Claire Melissa blinked like she'd seen a ghost. "You're here?" Claire nodded. "I heard about Dad," Julian scoffed. "Didn't think you'd make it. Thought you were too busy saving the world one sixth-grade essay at a time." Claire ignored him. "How is he?" Melissa sighed dramatically. "They said it's neurological, something degenerative. Maybe Parkinson's. Maybe worse." He collapsed in front of the board, Gavin added. He couldn't even stand. Claire's face changed, but she didn't sit. She didn't cry. She just said softly, "Where is he upstairs?" "In his suite," Melissa said. "But he's sleeping. Don't wake him." "The doctor said rest is critical." Dr. Maxwell, Claire asked. Julian raised a brow. "Yeah. You remember him?" "I remember everything," Claire said. She turned toward the stairs. "Wait," Gavin called out. "Claire, you haven't been around. Don't make this your re-entry act." Claire stopped, looked back at him, not angry, just tired. "You think I'm here for an audience?" she said. "He's still my father, Gavin. Whether or not you think I earned the right to care." and she walked away, soft footsteps on hardwood, like a ghost returning to a house that had forgotten her. In the dim master suite, Thomas Barrett lay in bed. Still, fragile, his skin pale beneath warm lamplight. Claire stood in the doorway, heart pounding. The man who once carried her on his shoulders now looked like he could be swept away by a gust of wind. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. No response. She stepped in quietly, sat beside him, reached for his hand. It was cold. She closed her eyes. "I never stopped missing you," she whispered. "Even when you stopped calling. Even when you said I didn't belong in this family." Still no response, so she just sat there and stayed. Long after the rest of the house forgot he was upstairs. Long after the wine was gone and the arguments began again. And in that silence, in that soft, unseen moment, the first test had already begun. And she had already passed. The next morning brought no peace. The Barrett estate, normally quiet, regal, felt like a house waiting for a will to be read. Curtains were drawn, voices, hushed tension oozed from the walls, like humidity after a storm. Claire stood at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of black coffee. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, her body still wired with the heaviness of what she'd seen upstairs, her father reduced to breath and bones. She hadn't left his side until 3 a.m., when she finally slipped out and fell asleep in her childhood room. The wallpaper hadn't changed. Neither had the framed math award she won in 4th grade, the last time her father had told her he was proud. Now the kitchen filled slowly with the other Barretts. Melissa arrived first, wrapped in a silk robe and entitlement. She poured herself almond milk and cut 2 strawberries like it was an art form. "Rough night," she said, eyes glancing toward Claire's plain gray sweater. Claire didn't answer. Julian followed, yawning and scratching his head like a man who hadn't seen consequences in years. "Dad still out?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Dr. Maxwell's with him now." "Good." Julian grunted. "Maybe the doc can speed things up." Claire's head snapped toward him. "Speed what up exactly?" Julian raised his brows, unbothered. "Relax. I meant his treatment." Melissa chimed in. "Actually, we were talking last night. Gavin thinks it's time to, start preparing." "For what?" Claire asked, voice low. "For transition," said Gavin, now entering in a crisp navy blazer, like he'd never left the boardroom. "The company. The estate. We can't just sit on our hands." Claire stared at him, stunned. Dad collapsed less than 24 hours ago. "And the world won't pause to grieve him," Gavin replied coolly. "He'd be the first to tell you that." "Don't you dare use his discipline to justify your greed," Claire shot back. Gavin set his coffee down hard. "Greed. You haven't been here in 5 years, Claire. You chose to disappear. You left the business, the family. Now you show up the second Dad looks like he's dying, and suddenly, you're the moral compass. I didn't leave the family." Claire said, her voice trembling but firm. "I left the performance, the act, the way everyone started loving each other less and proving it more." Melissa chuckled. "Oh, here comes the poetry." Gavin stepped forward close. His voice dropped low. "You want to talk about real? You want to be part of this family again? Then let's start with honesty. This house, this company, this life. It wasn't built on sentiment. It was built on decisions, ruthless ones. That's why Dad made it, and that's why I'll carry it forward." Claire held his gaze. "Dad made it? Yes. But not because he was ruthless. He made it because he gave a damn. About people. About purpose. You strip that away, Gavin, and all you have left is a building with a fancy name." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sharp. Julian broke it with a half laugh, tossing a piece of bread into the toaster. "God, this is exhausting. Just say it. Everyone's thinking about what happens when the old man dies. No, Claire said. Not everyone. At that moment, the housekeeper Maria stepped in, eyes filled with worry. Miss Claire, your father is asking for you. Claire rose without hesitation. She didn't look back. Thomas lay propped up in bed, sunlight casting soft stripes through the blinds. He looked worse this morning, and yet when he saw Claire, a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not relief, not joy, something more complex. You asked for me, Claire said gently. Thomas blinked slowly. His lips trembled. Water. She poured him a glass and held it to his lips. His hands were too shaky to lift it. When he finished, he breathed deeper. His breath like sandpaper over dry wood. I heard them downstairs, he murmured. Claire sat beside him, her fingers wrapping around his. I'm sorry you had to, she whispered. Thomas swallowed. I told them once, this company was built on steel and backbone. But now, all I hear is scraping forks. Claire bit her lip. They're scared. He turned his head slightly. And you? She hesitated. I'm not here for what's next, Dad. I'm here for what's still here. His hand tightened slightly around hers. There was a pause. Do you remember that old tree swing? He asked suddenly. Claire smiled through her tears. The one you built from the tire. In the backyard. You were 6. Screamed like hell every time I pushed too high. I was terrified you'd let go. Thomas coughed a rough, broken sound. I never would have. Claire lowered her head beside his hand. I know that now. He closed his eyes. Downstairs, Gavin stood with Melissa and Julian in the living room, unfolding a set of legal documents. I spoke to the estate attorney, he said. If Dad's condition deteriorates, we can file for interim power of attorney. We can manage operations, even sell assets if needed. Julian raised a brow. We're doing this already. Melissa shrugged. He's barely speaking. He's not capable. No, said a quiet voice behind them. They turned. Claire stood at the base of the stairs, her face pale but firm. He's still capable. And until he's not, no one makes a move. Gavin scoffed. You think he's going to bounce back? Claire stepped closer. No, I think he deserves better than vultures hovering while his breath still fogs the mirror. Melissa folded her arms. Don't get sanctimonious, Claire. You didn't even come to Mom's funeral. Claire's jaw tightened. Because Dad told me not to. The silence was absolute. Claire took a breath. You can play whatever game you want, but I'm staying. And I'm not going anywhere until I know he's not alone. Then she walked past them, calm, composed, each step a quiet rebellion against everything they had become. And for the first time since Thomas Barrett fell, someone in that house was finally standing. Claire awoke before the sun. The old wooden floors of her childhood room creaked beneath her feet as she tiptoed past the dusty window seat and out into the hallway. The scent of the house hadn't changed, cedar fresh linens, and the faintest trace of her mother's lavender oil that still lingered in the banister wood. But everything else felt unfamiliar, colder somehow. She made her way down the stairs, the silence of the mansion pressing in around her like fog. The kitchen was still dark when she arrived, except for the soft glow of the under-cabinet light. Maria, the housekeeper, of nearly 20 years, was already brewing coffee. Maria turned with a warm but tired smile. Couldn't sleep either. Claire shook her head. How is he? Maria sighed, lowering her voice. Restless. He asked for you again around 3, then fell back asleep. Claire nodded, poured herself a cup, and sat at the breakfast nook. I used to think this house was a home, she said quietly, but last night, it felt like a courtroom. Maria gave her a knowing look. You left Claire, but your heart didn't. That's why you feel it so clearly now. Claire smiled faintly. Sometimes I wish I didn't. Maria gently placed a hand over hers. Love always leaves the light on even when the house goes dark. An hour later, she climbed the stairs with a tray of breakfast, soft scrambled eggs, toast black coffee just the way her father used to like it. The door to his suite was slightly ajar. She knocked softly before entering. Thomas Barrett lay propped against crisp white pillows, eyes open face, pale but alert. "Morning," Claire said gently. He looked at her blinking once, as if measuring the shape of her face in morning light. "Coffee," he rasped. She smiled. "Of course. Strong enough to bring down a bear just how you like it." She helped him sit up, fluffing pillows behind his back. There was something almost sacred in the way she did it. Patient, gentle, like she wasn't just helping a sick man, but slowly repairing a broken bridge. Thomas took a sip, his hands unsteady. "It's been a long time." Claire nodded. 6 years, 5 years, 8 months, 12 days, he said, without looking at her. She stilled. "You counted." He finally turned to her. I never stopped. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just full. Like a room long sealed, finally letting in air. "Why did you come back?" he asked. Claire considered her answer carefully. "Because when the call came in, I didn't hesitate." And that surprised me. Thomas tilted his head slightly. "I thought I was done with this house, with this family." Claire continued, "But the moment I heard you collapsed, I felt like a daughter again, not out of guilt, just instinct." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's what being a Barrett should feel like." "But it hasn't, has it?" she asked. "Not in a long time." His face twitched with the hint of pain, and not just physical. "I don't know when it happened," he murmured. "Maybe after your mother died. Maybe before." The house got bigger, but the heart got smaller. Claire sat beside him, resting the tray on the nightstand. "I tried to talk to you back then," she said. "When you were working 18-hour days and never smiling." "I tried, and I didn't want to hear it," he admitted. "I punished you for caring." She looked away, blinking fast. "You told me I didn't belong in this family, that a public school teacher had no business lecturing legacy." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "And yet, here you are, still lecturing." Claire smiled through the ache in her chest. "Old habits." He opened his eyes again. "I'm glad you're here." It was 4 words, just 4. But she hadn't heard anything like them in years. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He reached for her hand with effort, his grip weak but certain. "Don't." Later that afternoon, Gavin called for a family meeting. Claire reluctantly agreed, if only to make sure her father's interests weren't steamrolled while he lay upstairs. They gathered in the formal sitting room, the one their mother used to decorate every Christmas with silver and navy ornaments, the room that now echoed only with tension. Gavin stood in front of the marble fireplace like a CEO in training. "We need to start thinking proactively," he said, holding a binder. "If Dad continues to decline, the company will need formal interim leadership. Shareholders are already nervous." Melissa, seated on a velvet settee, added, "And we'll need to secure the estate. There are tax considerations, legacy holdings, real estate evaluations." Julian popped a macadamia nut into his mouth and mumbled, "Also, someone needs to tell HR to lock down internal leaks. Media's already sniffing around." Claire folded her arms. "Is this a family discussion or a press conference?" Gavin barely blinked. "It's reality, Claire. We can't afford to get sentimental." Claire rose to her feet, her voice calm but resonant. "Let me make something clear. Sentiment is not the opposite of strategy. It's the soul behind the structure. Dad didn't build this company on spreadsheets. He built it on trust, on loyalty, on vision. You think you can take over his chair without carrying his heart, you'll collapse faster than he did." Melissa frowned. "So what's your proposal?" Simple Claire replied. Nothing happens until Dad says it does. No signatures, no sell-offs, no power of attorney. Gavin stepped forward. You're not a shareholder, Claire. You gave up your rights when you left. I gave up the title, Claire said, her eyes unwavering, not the blood. The room fell silent. And then, unexpectedly, Julian leaned forward. She's right. Gavin turned to him, stunned. What? Julian shrugged. I mean, we're all circling like it's already over. That's not what Dad would want. Melissa looked between them, exasperated. You two are siding with the prodigal daughter. Claire turned to leave but stopped at the doorway. Prodigal or not, she said quietly. I'm the only one who remembers what this house used to feel like. She walked out, leaving behind 3 siblings, staring into silence. Upstairs, behind a slightly cracked door, Thomas Barrett closed his eyes and let a tear slip down his cheek. Not because he was weak, but because finally he wasn't alone. The click of Gavin's pen was sharp, deliberate, like the ticking of a slow-moving bomb. He stood alone in their father's private study, a room few had ever entered without invitation. Framed architectural sketches lined the walls. A globe rested in the corner, dusty from years of disuse. Behind the walnut desk lay a locked cabinet with files labeled in neat block handwriting. Federal contracts, legacy accounts, personal trusts. Gavin's gaze fixed on one drawer in particular. Confidential Sunset Holdings. He tapped the folder once, then again. Sunset Holdings owned the family's most valuable properties, 2 corporate towers in Chicago and the West Bay Development Project. Liquidating just one could fund a full quarter of company operations, or better yet, cover the launch of Gavin's visionary expansion plan he'd drafted months ago, but had never shown his father. Because he already knew what the old man would say. Grow roots before you build branches, Thomas Barrett had once told him. Stability before ambition. That's leadership, son, not empire chasing. But the old rules didn't apply anymore. Gavin wasn't a boy in need of advice. He was the heir. Or would be soon. He opened the file. In the kitchen, Claire rinsed dishes, her hands trembling slightly beneath the faucet. She had spent the last hour at their father's bedside, watching his breath rise and fall in soft, shallow waves. The doctor had said Thomas was stable for now. But stability was relative in this house. Maria approached her gently. Miss Claire, something you should know. Claire turned. What is it? Maria hesitated, lowering her voice. Mr. Gavin met with the estate accountant this morning. They brought in a second notary. I heard them talking about deeds. Property deeds. Claire's heart dropped. Which property I don't know, Maria whispered. But they said something about the West Bay. Claire dried her hands quickly, her breath hitching. The West Bay development wasn't just valuable. It was their mother's legacy, the final project she'd co-designed with Thomas before her passing. A mixed-use waterfront space, built not for profit, but to revive a dying community. If Gavin was planning to sell it. Claire didn't hesitate. She marched to the study. Gavin didn't look up when she entered. Knocking would have been nice. We were taught not to knock on our own father's door, she replied. What are you doing? He closed the file slowly. Due diligence. Cut the crap. Gavin, are you selling West Bay? His jaw flexed, then relaxed. If I am, it's for the good of the company. We're bleeding investor confidence. Do you even know how close we are to defaulting on our bond commitments? You don't get to use Dad's heart as your ATM, Gavin scoffed. Don't get dramatic, Claire. It's just land. No, she snapped. It's Mom's land. It's his memory of her. It's the only project they ever built together, and you're pawning it off like some abandoned strip mall. He stood. You don't understand business. She stepped closer. And you don't understand legacy. His voice turned cold. This company was never meant to be sentimental. You can't lead with your heart and survive in this world. Claire didn't blink. That's why you'll never lead it. Because you think heart is a weakness. Gavin's fists curled. You don't belong here. You left. She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. And yet here I am. The only one still fighting for what matters. Later that evening, the family gathered in the living room under the pretense of transparency. Melissa sipped from a crystal flute. Julian sat slouched on the leather couch phone, in hand, tapping through crypto charts. Claire remained standing. Gavin cleared his throat. I've authorized the legal review for the sale of the West Bay property. Claire's breath caught. Melissa's brow lifted. You what? It's undervalued, underperforming, and strategically obsolete, Gavin continued. We can use the capital to stabilize our core operations and fund innovation. You mean fund your pet projects? Claire interrupted. Gavin ignored her. We've already begun soft negotiations with buyers. Nothing final yet. But you don't have Dad's permission, Claire said, voice rising. Julian glanced up. Do we need it? Yes, Claire said firmly. Until there's a power of attorney or an active, nothing moves. Melissa spoke cautiously. But what if he never signs anything? Are we just supposed to sit here waiting for the inevitable? Claire looked at each of them. No. You're supposed to remember who built this house, who stayed up nights building those towers you now want to gut for cash. He's not gone. He's not helpless. He's watching. A long silence. Then Julian exhaled. I don't know what's worse, that you're right, or that I didn't even think to ask. Claire's voice softened. We don't have to be this kind of family, Gavin snapped. And what kind of family is that, Claire? The kind that lets emotion bankrupt everything our father worked for. No, Claire said. The kind that remembers why he built it in the first place. She turned and walked out. Upstairs, Thomas sat in the dim quiet of his room. The door was closed, but the hallway carried every word from the floor below. When Claire entered, he didn't look at her, only whispered, They're selling West Bay. Not if I can help it, she said, voice raw. Thomas turned slowly toward her, his face lined with pain and disbelief. I built that with your mother, he said. She picked the brick color. She designed the rooftop gardens. Said kids needed green places to dream. Claire knelt beside him. Then we won't let them tear it down. He closed his eyes. I'm tired, Claire. She held his hand. Then rest. I'll stand for both of us. He squeezed once, weak but certain. Outside the window, the city lights flickered across the bay, distant, defiant, and still standing. Just like her. The knock on Claire's bedroom door came just after midnight. 3 soft taps, hesitant. Then silence. She opened it to find Maria still dressed in her apron, face pale beneath the dim hallway light. I'm sorry, Miss Claire, she whispered. It's your father. He's burning up. Claire didn't wait for another word. She was already running. The master suite was heavy with heat. The fireplace hadn't been touched, but Thomas Barrett lay shivering in a tangle of soaked sheets, his forehead glistening with sweat. His breathing was fast, shallow, and uneven, like wind catching against torn sails. Claire rushed to his side, pressing the back of her hand against his cheek. It was burning. Dad, she whispered. Hey, I'm here. I'm right here. His eyes fluttered open but didn't focus. He mumbled something. Inaudible, garbled. Maria, get a cool towel, Claire said urgently. And call Dr. Maxwell. Now. Maria nodded and hurried off. Claire gently lifted his head and placed a second pillow beneath it. You're okay, she whispered. You're okay. I've got you. Thomas coughed, deep, dry rattling. It shook through his chest like it was trying to escape him. Claire sat down beside him and reached for his hand. It was limp, but he squeezed back just faintly. Don't leave, he rasped. "I won't," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Downstairs, the fireplace crackled in the sitting room. The rest of the Barrett siblings were awake, now called in by Maria. Melissa lounged on the arm of the couch, silk robe wrapped tight around her frame. Julian paced, barefoot phone pressed to his ear. Gavin stood at the bar cart, pouring himself a scotch, like the world wasn't unraveling upstairs. "He's feverish," Claire said as she entered, voice low and clipped. "Dr. Maxwell's on his way." Gavin raised an eyebrow. "It's not unexpected. His immune system's compromised." "Don't pretend this is normal," Claire snapped. "You're acting like we're preparing for a quarterly report, not watching our father deteriorate." Gavin downed the scotch in one gulp. "What would you like me to do? Cry at the staircase?" Melissa cut in her voice. "Cool. Claire, we're all upset. But drama doesn't help anyone." Claire stared at them, a bitter smile forming. "You're not upset. You're inconvenienced. There's a difference." Julian finally hung up the phone and sighed. "You think we don't care? You think just because we didn't sit next to him all night we've written him off, I think." Claire said evenly that if he took his last breath tonight, none of you would cancel your morning meetings. No one spoke. "I've heard the whispering," she continued. "Power of attorney. Emergency sale clauses. Gavin, you've already started the paperwork. Don't deny it." Gavin stepped forward. "Claire," she cut him off. "He asked me not to leave, so I won't. But if any of you try to take another piece of this house, this company, this family before he's gone, I will burn every legal bridge you think protects you." Julian let out a soft whistle. "Well, there's the Barrett backbone." "No," Claire said quietly. "That's the Barrett heart. And it's the one thing this house used to have." She turned and walked out, back up the stairs, back into the heat of the room, where Thomas Barrett lay fighting shadows in his sleep. By dawn, the fever had broken. Dr. Maxwell had arrived, administered fluids, checked vitals, and left a warning. "He's fragile. Another night like this could be catastrophic." Claire stayed at his bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest as the morning light filtered through the blinds. Her father was a man of steel and edges, but now he was soft clay in time's hands. The silence between them felt heavier than the oxygen tank beside his bed. When his eyes finally opened, they landed on her. "You stayed," he whispered. Claire smiled faintly. "You asked me to." He nodded, slow and grateful. "I had a dream," he said. "Your mother. She was planting something." Claire reached for his hand. "What was she planting?" "I don't know," he said. "But she looked peaceful." Claire swallowed hard. "Maybe she was reminding you that roots matter." He looked at her, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Until finally he said, "I never thought you'd come back." Claire blinked. "Neither did I." That afternoon, Diana arrived. The stepmother. Elegant, perfumed, always just slightly too cold. She hadn't been seen in weeks. Rumors had circulated Palm Springs, maybe New York. Claire didn't care. Diana stepped into the master suite without knocking. "Well," she said, looking around. "It still smells like illness in here." Claire stood her back, stiffening. "I didn't know you were back," Diana said, to her voice brittle. "I never left," Claire replied. Diana walked closer to the bed, glancing briefly at Thomas. "He looks awful." "He almost died last night," Claire said. Diana sniffed. "And still no nurse. Still doing the Florence Nightingale act yourself," Claire's voice dropped. "What do you want, Diana?" "I want to clean out the guest room," she said. "I can't keep sleeping on that lumpy mattress in the garden wing. Thomas should be moved." Claire stepped between her and the bed. "He's not going anywhere." Diana raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. He's not some piece of furniture you shift to make your morning more comfortable," Claire said. "This is his room, his space, and until he says otherwise, he stays." Diana's eyes narrowed. You forget yourself. No, Claire said firmly. I'm finally remembering who I am. Diana turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. Thomas stirred. What was that? Claire smoothed the blanket over him. Nothing important. Just rearranging the furniture. He chuckled, weak but real. And for the first time in days, Claire laughed too. Not because anything was funny, but because somewhere deep in her bones, she could feel the foundation shifting. The house may not be a home yet, but maybe it could be again. The storm rolled in just after dusk. It wasn't the loud kind. No thunder cracked. No lightning split the sky. It was slow and steady, a cold rain that whispered against the windows and soaked the hedges with melancholy. Claire sat by her father's bedside, the soft light of the bedside lamp pooling over his face like gold. He was asleep again, thinner than ever, his skin pale as old paper. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that no longer felt reassuring but borrowed. She reached for a cloth and gently wiped his forehead. The fever hadn't returned, but his body was trembling beneath the blanket. His once powerful hands now looked fragile, veined like glass beneath the skin. She watched him, and her thoughts drifted not to the company or the estate, or even her siblings, but to a day that had stayed buried for years. She was 10. There'd been a terrible storm then too, hail bouncing off the roof wind so loud it drowned out the TV. She was crying in her room, terrified, clutching her teddy bear. And then the door creaked open. Thomas Barrett had walked in, boots, muddy jacket, soaked hair dripping from rushing home in the storm. He didn't say a word. He just sat on the edge of her bed, picked her up like she was 5 again, and held her. "You're safe," he whispered. "Daddy's here. Nothing can touch you now." It was the only time she'd ever seen him vulnerable. Not weak, but soft. She'd never forgotten it. Now, as the rain whispered against the Barrett windows again, she whispered the same words back to him. "You're safe now. I'm here. Nothing's going to touch you." His eyelids fluttered. He wasn't fully conscious, but he heard her. She knew he did. Downstairs, the siblings had gathered again. But this time, it wasn't over property or power. It was panic. Melissa paced the foyer, her heels clicking like a metronome. "We can't keep going like this. The board's calling for a formal update. Investors want statements." Gavin stood by the bay windows, arms folded. "If we say he's incapacitated, we open the door to shareholders questioning our control. If we say he's fine, we're lying." Julian chimed in, arms crossed. "I got a call today. Someone offered to buy our licensing rights. 40 million, up front." Melissa stopped pacing. Who? Julian shrugged. "A venture capital firm in Seattle. They want to modernize the Barrett brand." "That's code for gut it and rebrand it with robots," Gavin muttered. "We may not have a choice," Julian said. "Yes," Claire said from the stairs. "You do." They all turned to see her dressed in a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back, eyes exhausted, but steady. "She's awake," Melissa said, exasperated. Claire stepped off the final stair. "I've been awake for 6 days. You're just now noticing." Julian threw up his hands. "Great. More lectures?" "No," Claire said. "Just one question." She walked into the center of the room and faced them. "When did we stop being a family?" They didn't answer. Was it when Mom died? Or when Dad started missing birthdays? Was it when you started seeing shares instead of siblings? Gavin clenched his jaw. "This again?" "Yes," Claire snapped. "This again. Because while you've been chasing signatures and asset portfolios, he's upstairs fighting to stay alive, and none of you have sat beside him." Melissa crossed her arms. "And that makes you what, St. Clair?" "No," Claire said softly. "It just makes me a daughter." A long silence followed. Then surprisingly, Julian sank into the leather armchair. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he admitted. "I thought if I kept pushing forward, it would all make sense." Claire nodded slowly. "It doesn't. Not until you slow down enough to remember why you're moving at all." Melissa didn't speak, but her eyes softened. Gavin stayed quiet the longest. When he finally spoke, it was without the sharp edge he usually carried. "I don't know how to sit still," he said. "Dad never did." Claire looked at him with something like understanding. "That's why it scared you when he collapsed. Because for the first time he stopped. And you didn't know what to do. He didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either." That night, Claire sat beside Thomas again. He was resting easier now, the lines of pain around his mouth less pronounced. The rain had stopped. She picked up the old photo album that had been tucked away in the nightstand. It smelled faintly of cedar and age. She turned the pages slowly one by one. Her parents on their wedding day, her mother radiant, her father stunned, as if he'd been handed something too beautiful to keep. Claire as a toddler, hands covered in paint, standing in front of the first Barrett project, a community center with a garden and no gates. Her father laughing, holding her on his shoulders. She looked at the man in the bed, then back at the photo. Somewhere between those two images was the truth. He wasn't just her father, he was their foundation. And if they lost him, not just the man, but the meaning behind him, everything they built would fall. She leaned forward, kissed his temple, and whispered again. "You were the strength. Now let me be yours." Outside, the first rays of dawn stretched over the city, and for the first time in years, the Barrett house didn't feel like it was waiting for a funeral. It felt like it might just be waiting to live again. The invitation came not by phone, but by formality. A cream-colored envelope hand-delivered to each sibling's suite by Maria early in the morning. Embossed in gold lettering were 5 words that made Claire's heart twist. Meeting regarding estate matters. 10:01 a.m. Claire didn't need to guess who had summoned it. When she entered the study an hour later, the others were already seated. Melissa wore black silk and pearls like she was attending a premiere. Julian scrolled through his phone until Gavin shot him a look. And Gavin, always, the commander, sat at the head of the room with a legal pad, a fountain pen, and a face carved from granite. Claire took the seat closest to the window. She didn't greet anyone. They didn't greet her. Then the door opened. Mr. Hollis, the family's longtime estate attorney, stepped in. Tall, gray-haired, and precise, he wore the same navy suit he'd worn to their mother's funeral. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "No need to thank us," Gavin said. "Let's get this over with." Mr. Hollis offered a polite nod, opened his leather folder, and began. "As per your request, I am here today to clarify the legal status of Thomas Barrett's estate, specifically his will powers of attorney and designated successors." Claire's stomach tightened. Melissa leaned forward. "Let's start with the will. We all know he was planning to update it after Mom passed. Did he finally do it?" Mr. Hollis looked up, his expression unreadable. "There is no will," he said, calmly. A beat of stunned silence. "No what?" Gavin asked. "No valid signed and notarized last will and testament has been filed or registered by Mr. Barrett," Hollis replied. He had initiated several drafts, but none were executed under the law. Claire's eyes widened. She turned to look at Gavin. His face had frozen. "You're telling me," Melissa said slowly, "that everything, this entire estate, the business, the properties, there's no legal distribution plan in place?" "Correct?" Hollis said. Julian blinked. "But we're his children. Doesn't it just pass to us equally?" Hollis sighed. In the absence of a will, the estate would fall under California's laws of intestate succession. However, that only applies upon confirmed death. Gavin slammed his pen down. So you're saying we can't touch anything until he dies? Not unless you have a court-appointed conservatorship or his consent, Hollis replied. Claire spoke for the first time. And he hasn't given either. No, Hollis confirmed, then turned to her with a look that felt personal. He's quite clear about that. Melissa scoffed. So we're just stuck. Sitting around while the company tanks. The company, Hollis said, remains under Mr. Barrett's ownership. He has not transferred shares or authorized proxy voting. Julian frowned. Then why are we even here? Mr. Hollis closed the folder. Because your father believed you deserved to hear the truth from me, not each other. And frankly, because he wanted to see what you'd do when the script was taken away. Claire's breath caught. Melissa crossed her arms. He's watching us. Mr. Hollis gave a dry smile. He always has been. The meeting ended in icy silence. Claire remained behind, as the others filed out, Gavin with his fists clenched, Melissa muttering under her breath. Julian already texting someone. She stood and walked over to Mr. Hollis. Why did he really ask you to do this? She asked. Mr. Hollis paused, then said gently, because he wanted to know if they'd come for him. Or just for what comes after him. Claire nodded, her throat tightening. He also asked me, Hollis added, to remind you of the bench. Claire blinked. The what? The bench, Hollis said. He said you'd understand. Her eyes widened. The bench. She hadn't thought of it in years. It was the stone bench behind the old oak tree near the west fence, where he used to take her when life got loud. When she was small and scared of too many things, storms, school, the dark, he'd sit beside her and say, "The bench isn't here to move you, it's here so you can be still." Claire whispered, "I remember." Good, Hollis said. He hoped you would. That evening the house was quiet, in the way a battlefield is quiet after the smoke clears. Claire stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The air was cool, the sky turning amber with dusk. She walked past the hedges through the garden her mother had designed, and down the winding path that led to the back fence. And there it was. The bench, worn, cracked slightly at the edges, moss gathering at its base, but still strong, still waiting. She sat. Silence settled over her like a blanket. Birdsong drifted in from somewhere far off. A wind chime jingled softly on the porch. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of old stone and jasmine. After a few minutes, soft footsteps approached. She turned. It was Gavin, hands in his pockets. Tie loosened, eyes less sharp than usual. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "Good," Claire replied. He sat down beside her. They didn't speak for a long while. Then he said quietly, "I thought I was supposed to be him." Claire looked at him. "Who Dad?" Gavin said. "I thought if I worked harder, acted tougher, I could fill the space he left." "You thought the only way to be close to him," Claire said gently, "was to become what he showed you." He looked away. "I didn't know how to be anything else." Claire stared at the yard in front of them. He built this family like a house. Foundation first. Strong beams. Straight lines. But somewhere along the way, we started redecorating with ego. He let out a quiet laugh. "You always were better with words." She nudged him. "You're not bad with blueprints." They both smiled. For a moment, just a moment, the old weight lifted. Claire stood. "You should come see him." Gavin nodded slowly. "I will." She walked away, her heart a little fuller than before. Back inside the house, Thomas Barrett lay, still eyes closed. But the corner of his mouth curled upward just slightly, because the one thing he'd hoped for was starting to happen. The hum of the espresso machine was the only sound in the kitchen. Claire stood at the counter, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the one her mother used to favor. The morning sun cut through the kitchen blinds in soft stripes, touching the edges of a world that felt slightly less fractured than the day before. She took a slow sip, trying to ignore the heaviness in her chest. For the first time since she'd arrived, she had slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but long enough to dream. Her father had been in that dream, sitting beside her on the garden bench again, humming a song he used to whistle when fixing the porch swing. But in the dream, the bench was cracked down the middle. Still standing, but barely. Claire didn't need a dream analyst to know what it meant. She set the mug down, and that's when she heard it. Voices. Heated. Low at first, but rising. Coming from the study. She walked toward it, heart tightening with every step. Inside, Gavin was standing behind their father's desk, flanked by two unfamiliar men in suits. Legal folders were open. Real estate documents, printouts, valuations all laid out like a map of conquest. Claire froze in the doorway. "You're doing it," she said. Gavin looked up. "Claire, it's not what you think." No, her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut marble. "Because it looks like you're selling the only thing left that matters," he exhaled, irritated. "We're preparing options. Contingencies." "Contingencies," she echoed. "You mean rationalizations." The two men looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Gavin turned to them. "Could you give us a moment, please?" They nodded and exited. Claire walked slowly into the room, stopping at the edge of the desk. "You said you wouldn't move until Dad gave his word." Gavin's jaw tightened. "And how much longer are we supposed to wait, Claire?" He can barely form sentences. The company's running out of time. The board's pressing. "We're not children playing house anymore." "No," she said. "We're not." Which is exactly why this, she gestured to the papers, is a betrayal. He looked at her eyes glinting. "You think standing by a sick bed makes you a savior?" She didn't blink. "No. But it keeps me human." Gavin circled the desk, suddenly full of motion. "You want to know the truth? The real truth? Fine. I've been working on this company since I was 22. I gave up law school. I gave up time, relationships. I gave everything to prove I could be the man Dad expected me to be." Claire's voice softened. "No one asked you to do that." "Exactly," he snapped. "No one asked. But I did it anyway. Because I thought maybe one day he'd look at me and say, 'Well done.' Not, 'You should have been more like your sister.' Not, 'Claire had more heart.'" She stared at him, stunned. "That's what this is about." He looked away, ashamed. "You were always his favorite." "No," she said, voice quiet. "I was just the only one who ever disappointed him to his face." He looked back at her. "I never played perfect," she continued. "That's why he trusted me when things fell apart. Not because I was better, but because I was honest." Gavin didn't speak. Claire took a breath. "You want to earn his legacy? Then stop carving it up while he's still breathing." Gavin's shoulders dropped, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like the boy who used to help her build couch forts in the den. But the spell broke when the door swung open, and Melissa stormed in. Her voice was sharp as glass. "Is it true you're selling the West Wing property?" Gavin blinked. "It's just a conversation. That was my inheritance," she snapped. "Dad promised me that land." Claire turned. "Promised he hasn't signed a thing." Melissa rounded on her. "Of course he hasn't. He was waiting. For the right moment. For clarity. For peace. And you're ruining it." Claire frowned. "I'm ruining it. You show up after years." Melissa spat with your soft voice and your tragic teacher's salary. And suddenly, we're all villains. Claire didn't respond. Newsflash. Claire Melissa sneered. "Love doesn't pay for lawyers, or medical bills, or mortgage interest. Maybe if you'd stuck around when Mom died, stop," Claire said sharply. But Melissa wasn't done. No, you don't get to stop me. Not after disappearing during the worst year of our lives and showing up now like a martyr. You ran away. You let us carry it. You let me carry it." Claire's face fell. "You think I left because I didn't care? You left because you couldn't handle reality." "No," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I left because no one was willing to grieve her out loud. We just went back to work, to meetings, to pretending she never existed. I couldn't do that." Silence, a long, raw silence, and then another voice spoke, low, scratchy, from the doorway. "You shouldn't have had to." They turned. Thomas Barrett stood there, pale, unsteady, but standing. One hand on the doorframe, the other gripping his oxygen cart. His eyes were clear, wet at the corners, but clear. Claire rushed to him. "Dad," he raised a hand. "I'm all right," he said hoarsely. "Let me speak." No one moved. "I heard you," he said. Voice low. "All of you. Every word." He looked at Gavin. "I saw your work, your sacrifices. But leadership isn't about who bleeds the most. It's about who stops others from bleeding." Then to Melissa. "I saw your pain. I know you felt abandoned, but money won't patch a grieving heart." Then to Claire. "And you never asked for anything. But you gave me back everything I'd forgotten." He looked around the room. "I'm not dead," he said, his voice rising. "And until I am no one sells signs or decides anything without my voice in the room." Gavin stepped forward. "Dad, you shouldn't be standing." Thomas raised his hand again. "I've been lying down long enough." He turned and walked out. Claire followed him, slowly, tears in her eyes. And behind her, the house finally remembered how to be quiet. Not from tension, but from respect. They found him on the back porch the next morning, already dressed in his thick flannel shirt and a pair of worn boots no one had seen in years. The oxygen tank was still beside him, tubing looped over one ear, but Thomas Barrett looked less like a patient and more like a man reclaiming his place. He was sipping black coffee steam, curling into the brisk morning air. The old rocking chair creaked gently beneath him, the same one Claire used to climb into as a child, when the thunder rolled through the valley. Claire stepped outside first. "You shouldn't be out here in the cold," she said softly. He didn't look at her, just nodded toward the rising sun. "It's the only thing that shows up without asking anything in return." She sat beside him. A long pause passed between them, gentle unsud necessary. Then he spoke. "Gavin thinks I never saw him." Claire didn't respond. Thomas continued. "But I did. I saw the late nights, the stress, the way he tried to stand taller every time I walked in the room. I saw all of it." "Then why didn't you tell him?" Claire asked. "Because I thought I didn't need to," Thomas admitted. "I thought love was implied, that it didn't need saying." He turned to look at her. "But it does. Doesn't it?" Claire's eyes glistened. "More than anything." He nodded slowly. "That's my failure." "No," Claire said gently. "That's just being human." Thomas chuckled dry and low. "Well, I've been human in some pretty spectacular ways." They sat in silence again, watching the mist lift from the yard. Then he said almost to himself, "I built this place to keep everyone close. Turns out walls don't do that. Words do." Claire smiled softly. "So speak." He looked at her, then nodded. And for the first time in years, Thomas Barrett asked for something. "Call them. All of them. I want to talk. Properly." The family gathered in the drawing room that afternoon. No contracts, no lawyers, no agendas, just chairs circled like a campfire. Thomas sat at the center, bundled in his robe, oxygen tank humming beside him. But his voice was clear, his eyes sharp. He looked around at his children, Gavin jaw clenched, but eyes open. Melissa, arms folded, but silent. Julian for once not checking his phone, and Claire steady as ever beside him. "I asked you here," Thomas began, "because I've realized I may not get many more chances to say what needs saying. And I won't waste what's left of my breath talking about stocks or deeds." He paused. "I want to talk about you." He turned to Gavin first. "You tried so hard to be strong, son. So hard to be me. But I never wanted you to carry what I carried. I wanted you to build on it, not live under it." Gavin looked down, his hands clutched together, like he didn't trust them to stay still. "I was proud of you before you ever earned a dime," Thomas said. "And I'm sorry I didn't say that when it mattered most." A tremble passed through Gavin's lip, but he didn't speak. Then Thomas turned to Melissa. "My steel rose," he said, with a gentle smile. "You held this family together longer than I had any right to expect. You did it with fire, and I mistook your flames for defiance." Melissa blinked, hard eyes shimmering. "You didn't fail me," he said. "I failed to see you were trying to lead in the only way you knew how." She swallowed, her voice low. "I just wanted you to lean on me. Just once." He reached for her hand and squeezed it. "I'm leaning now," he whispered. Then came Julian. "I worried for you, most," Thomas admitted, "because you ran from everything too fast to ever feel it catch you. But you've got more heart than any of us. You see beauty in things we all ignored." Julian chuckled softly, tears in his eyes. Like leather briefcases and antique bar carts, Thomas grinned. "Exactly." And then he turned to Claire. His voice softened. "You brought me back to life. Not because you stayed, but because you saw me." Claire's voice trembled. "I never stopped." He nodded. "And I never said, thank you." She reached forward, took his hand, and kissed it. "You're welcome," she whispered. Thomas looked at all of them, then sat back exhausted, but glowing with something unspoken release. "I don't have a will," he said. "Not yet. But I will." He paused. "It won't be about land, or money, or the company." He looked at them one by one. "It'll be about legacy. Not what you take, but what you give. How you lead with kindness, how you forgive, how you remember." No one spoke, and in the stillness that followed, something settled, a peace none of them expected. Later that evening, Claire stood in the hallway, looking at an old photo on the wall, the four of them kids again, lined up in front of the old station wagon, juice boxes in hand, shoes scuffed from playing tag. Back when life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Gavin came up beside her. He meant every word he said quietly. "I know. I'm going to try," Gavin added. Claire smiled. "So am I." A long pause. Then Gavin said, "Do you think he's dying?" Claire's voice was calm. "I think he's living, more now than ever." And as they stood there shoulder to shoulder, the echoes of old pain slowly started to fade. What was left was something quieter, stronger. Love, unspoken for too long, finally given voice. The first call came at 5:47 a.m. It was Maria. Claire sat up in bed before the second ring. She knew. The way a daughter knows when something shifts, when a presence that once held the world together has let go. She answered. "I'm coming." No questions, no panic, just motion. She pulled on a sweater over her nightshirt and didn't bother with makeup. Her bare feet slid into slippers worn down at the heel. The house was still wrapped in night shadows, stretching long across the carpeted halls. By the time she reached the master bedroom, Gavin was already there, standing by the window, hands clenched at his sides. Melissa sat in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest, mascara smudged, though she wasn't wearing any the night before. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, as if moving forward might make it more real. Claire crossed the room, calm, present, purposeful. Her father lay there still and peaceful, not collapsed, not gone in violence or pain. just still. The oxygen tube had been removed. His chest did not rise. His fingers, once so steady in boardrooms and gentle in gardens, were now folded neatly on his chest, holding the old silver cross their mother had once worn. Maria stood near the nightstand, eyes red. He waited, she whispered to Claire, until all of you were under the same roof, until he could say what he needed to. Claire nodded. "I'll take it from here," she said gently. Maria bowed her head and stepped out of the room. Claire reached out and brushed the last strands of silver hair back from her father's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for the final words, but for everything he'd never had the language to say. The funeral was set for 3 days later. They kept it private. No investors, no journalists, no board members with sterile condolences, just family, close friends, and a few men from the old lumberyard who remembered when Thomas Barrett used to bring his kids around on Saturdays, passing out donuts and letting them climb on forklift pallets. The chapel was modest, wood-paneled with high-arched windows that caught the morning sun. No extravagant flower displays, just a single arrangement of white lilies and wild sage hand-picked by Claire and Melissa the night before. It was Gavin who stood to speak first. He took the pulpit slowly, one hand shaking. For a long time he began. "I thought my father only loved results. He rarely said, 'I'm proud of you.' He never said, 'I'm scared,' or 'I need help.' I thought strength meant silence." He paused, voice thick. "But in the last few weeks I heard more from him than in all the years before. He didn't talk much, but when he didn't waste a single word. He taught me that strength isn't about what you carry, it's about knowing when to set it down." Gavin stepped down. His voice broke as he returned to his seat. Next was Julian. He didn't walk to the pulpit, just stood from his pew, hand in his pocket, the other clenching a small object. "I found this," he said, holding up an old keychain. "He gave it to me when I was 12. I thought it was just a key to his shed. But last night, I found out it also opens the old drawer in his desk." He held up a folded piece of paper. "It's a drawing I made in 3rd grade, of our house, our family. He kept it. All these years." Julian smiled through tears. He may not have said much, but he saw everything. Melissa followed. She didn't speak at first, just stood quietly before the gathering hands clasped. "I used to think being a Barrett meant being untouchable," she said, "but now I think it means being willing to be touched, to feel, to fall apart, to let others in. He didn't teach me that by preaching. He taught me that by breaking and letting us help him put the pieces back together." And finally, Claire stood. She walked slowly to the pulpit, her breath steady, her eyes dry, not from lack of grief, but from the depth of it. "My father built buildings. Yes, he built companies, partnerships, deals. But more than that, he built people. We just didn't always see it until we were nearly undone." She looked out at her siblings. "He left us no final instructions, no grand inheritance breakdown, no empire to divide." She paused. Because maybe the point wasn't to inherit. It was to become. After the chapel emptied, they took the ashes to the family garden. Beneath the old oak tree where their mother's stone already rested, Gavin dug the small patch of earth himself. No landscaper, no groundskeeper, just him, a spade, and the tremble in his breath. Claire placed the urn in gently. Melissa scattered the wild sage. Julian laid the old keychain on the soil before covering it back. And when it was done, they didn't rush away. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, quiet, changed. That night, back inside the house, Claire found herself in the old study. The desk was closed, his chair tucked in. But a small envelope lay in the center of the desk blotter, with her name written in strong, familiar strokes. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet. No signature, no date. Just 6 words. You became the best of me. Her tears came then, not in gasps, but in waves. Soft, steady, sacred. She folded the letter, pressed it to her heart, and whispered to the empty room, "So did you." Outside, the wind rustled the oak leaves, but the house did not feel haunted. It felt whole. Spring came slowly to the Barrett estate. The trees bloomed late that year, as if waiting for permission. The air held the warmth of something new being born, and for the first time in months, the house no longer felt like a museum of memories, but a place still writing its story. Claire stood at the window of her childhood room, looking out across the lawn, where the old tire swing still hung from the elm tree. A soft breeze fluttered the curtains behind her. She had opened every window in the house that morning, not out of habit, but out of choice. Let the past air itself out, she thought. Let it breathe. Downstairs, the sound of laughter floated up. Not the forced kind that came after funerals, or the brittle kind that snapped in business meetings. No, this was different. Real. Alive. In the kitchen, Melissa was bent over a bowl of pancake batter apron, dusted with flour hair, pulled back in a loose bun. Julian stood at the stove, flipping bacon, with the exaggerated flourish of a reality chef. Gavin sat at the table, reading a stack of handwritten notes, sipping black coffee. He wasn't barking orders, wasn't scrolling emails, just reading. Living. Claire entered and froze for a second, just taking it in. This was the miracle no one had asked for, but somehow all received. Melissa looked up. "If you don't get down here, we're naming the next dog after you." Claire grinned and joined them, grabbing a dish towel and swatting Julian playfully. "That bacon's gonna be charcoal if you keep monologuing." Julian smirked. A little drama never hurt a family. "No," Gavin said without looking up. "But honesty saves one." They all looked at him. He held up the top page of the stack in his hands. Dad's draft. For his will. Claire walked over and sat beside him. "You found it." "In the safe. It wasn't finished. Barely even a few pages. But it's not about assets. It's letters. One to each of us." Melissa put down the bowl. "He wrote to us." Gavin nodded. "Typed, but signed in pen. All of them. Every single one ends the same way." He passed a page to Claire. She read aloud. "May what I've built never be the thing you fight over, but the thing you build each other with." Silence fell. A reverent silence. Julian leaned against the counter, voice softer now. He didn't leave a kingdom. He left a compass. Melissa wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist. "And we get to choose where it points." That afternoon, they walked the grounds together. Not out of duty, but out of a quiet need to stay close. They paused near the bench beneath the oak tree, now shaded by fresh leaves. Claire sat down first, then Gavin beside her. Melissa leaning against the trunk, Julian crouched on the edge of the stone path, tracing a line in the dirt, with a twig like he used to as a boy. Claire looked around and smiled. "I've been thinking. Maybe we don't sell." Gavin raised an eyebrow. "The house." She nodded. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. Maybe we make it something more." Julian added, "Like a retreat for families, veterans, grief therapy." Melissa brightened. "Or a foundation. Something that honors both of them. Something real." Gavin looked out over the land. It could work, with the right planning. Claire smiled. "We'll figure it out. Together." And in that moment, there was no fight, no tension, no boardroom strategy, only 4 siblings sitting in the shade of a tree their father once planted, dreaming a new future that no one could inherit but them. Later that evening, Claire stood alone at the piano in the living room. It hadn't been touched in years. The keys had dulled from dust and sunlight. But when she pressed down softly, a sound rose, not perfect, Not polished, but full of soul. She played the lullaby their mother used to hum, slowly, carefully, like threading a needle through time. Melissa came in, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. She always played that when it rained. She whispered. Claire nodded. And when Dad was away too long. Melissa stepped closer, placing her hand gently on Claire's shoulder. Thank you. For coming back. Claire looked up. I didn't save this family, Mel. I know, Melissa said. But you reminded us how. By nightfall, the house was quiet. Not the cold quiet of morning, but the peaceful hush of something whole. In her old room, Claire sat with her father's letter in her lap. She had read it 12 times already, but each time it settled deeper. At the bottom, beneath his sprawling signature, he had written one final line, slanted hand-penned, unmistakably his. If you're reading this, then I didn't get to tell you again how much I love you. But I hope the life I gave you was a good enough echo. Claire closed her eyes. It had been more than an echo. It had been a lesson. A legacy. A long, unfinished conversation now finally answered. She stood, turned off the light, and walked down the hall. As she passed each door, she felt it not loss, but presence. A father's voice still humming in the beams. A mother's laughter caught in the curtain folds. A family no longer broken. Outside, beneath a sky scattered with stars, the wind moved through the trees. Not loud, not mournful, but like a whisper that said, "You're home. Keep going."